So, when I officially watched Interview with the Vampire, the 1994 movie, I had multiple thoughts at the same time. I remember watching this movie as a young girl, but when I was younger, I did not understand the layers of subtext that this movie had. And now that I'm older, I finally understand the dynamics that happens between all three characters. So, of course, I wanted to analyze it. And the first glaring thing that stuck out to me was not only that these two men definitely are parents when Claudia comes into the relationship, but especially Lestat takes on the role of a narcissistic mother, or at least the archetype of a narcissistic mother in this relationship, whereas Louis is the codependent father. Now, first things first, I don't think this is the exact same archetype Lestat takes in the 2022 adaptation, the TV show. I think the TV show tends to be more nuanced simply because there is more time to establish the layers between both characters. So for this analysis, I will be sticking only to the 1994 film. And I haven't read the books just yet. I've ordered them, but I am not completely there, so this would just be film analysis only. But feel free to drop more book lore in the comments. But first, if you don't know who I am, hi, my name is Deborah, student singer, songwriter, and everything else in between. Welcome back to my channel where I talk about my favorite TV shows, movies, and books. And today we're talking about Lestat, the Liancourt. Let's get into it. As a disclaimer, I do want to say that there are multiple forms of narcissism, and like I said, I'm not a psychologist. However, as somebody with the similar family dynamic system and also who has experienced this in relationships, I do feel that it is perfectly okay to have discussions about something or someone that particularly has these traits. At the end of the day, I don't want to encourage any hate towards anyone with a narcissistic disorder. I recognize that narcissism is a disorder and people are actually struggling with this, and there are people who are trying to get help. So please, this is not to lambast or to be hateful towards somebody, but rather to give an analysis of what I personally see within a character. But without further ado, let's get into it. Let's start with Lestat representing the mother. Why would I call Lestat the mother in this movie, in this adaptation, and in this relationship? If you think about it, Lestat is the one to birth Claudia. Let me explain. Lestat is the one who actually transformed Claudia of his own free will after Louis kills her. And after Louis kills her, his conscience cannot handle the fact that he has killed a little child. Not to mention his growing disdain for Lestat and the ways that Lestat lives. Whether it's by reading his mind or from his general everyday aura and mood, Lestat realizes that Louis does not want to be in a relationship with him anymore, that he does not want to live like Lestat or even live with Lestat. So Lestat comes up with an idea. With his deep wound and his fear of abandonment and hatred of being alone, in order to try and save their relationship, he turns Claudia. Claudia's transformation signalizes the act of birth. Louis is the one who killed Claudia, but Lestat is the one who brought her back to life and birthed her into a new form of life, which in a weird way does make him the mother. Even with Claudia's birth from the beginning, she is not seen as her own person, but rather as a prop. Another thing that we continue to see, which fits in with the dynamics of narcissistic parenting. In the actual adaptation, Daniel does refer to Lestat as a narcissist, and while I cannot officially diagnose him, I do like the fact that this is recognized in the official canon. Like I said, I'm going to give him the grace and recognize that this is a disorder, but I do want to highlight these dynamics that are common within narcissistic mothers. The first few sides that we see this sort of dynamic is with the first and obvious trait of manipulation. Narcissists are masters of manipulation. They will manipulate anyone around them for attention, admiration, and control. A narcissistic mother might manipulate their child through gaslighting, guilt tripping, or even stonewalling. We see this bright and clear even in his relationship with Louis. The birth of Claudia was brought by manipulation. Lestat knew that Louis would be very attached to a child that he just killed, and what better way to manipulate his partner into staying into this relationship by not only creating a child, but then emphasizing that Louis himself had a part to play in the birth of a child. Had Louis not killed Claudia, there wouldn't be a child in the first place to turn. So in this light, Lestat not only guilt trips Louis into staying, but also becomes the sort of savior. By giving birth to something new, he gets glory for it, fixing Louis' mistake. Louis has to stay as a result. He guilt trips Louis and manipulates him into staying into that relationship, and he does this solely for the reason of Louis' attention, love, and affection, but also to have control. Kind of gives this image of this mother who is desperate to save her relationship with a man who is clearly emotionally checked out, and so she brings in a child, thinking that a child is going to fix this relationship, and so that child, as Daniel says in the later adaptation, becomes a band-aid to a wrecked or destroyed marriage. Initially, after Claudia's birth, Lestat does seem to have some sort of affection for Claudia, but whereas Louis sees her as a child and something that he can love and adore, Lestat tends to see her as something he can not only lavish, but eventually mold into another version of himself. I think he also sees her as an extension of himself, at least at the beginning, before she betrays him in the film. But this is also further emphasized by Louis himself. In the tapes, Louis notices how Lestat was trying to teach Claudia to be his next protege, or his pupil, and therefore an extension of himself, someone who acts like Lestat, who is like Lestat. And so, because she is useful to him in that regard, she is also a prop. She mirrors him and his behavior. He can mold her into whatever he wants to. He also dresses her constantly like a doll, which I think is an important symbolism that I'll get to a little bit later. But just like a doll that you carry around and show off, in reality, he props Claudia in the same way. But the truth is that he's not very emotionally connected to Claudia, because Lestat himself isn't someone that has that much of an ability to have an emotional connection with others in the first place. To him, life is being a vampire and living in a certain way, being exuberant, extravagant, and enjoying what life has to offer with no regrets, and no contemplation of others' feelings, especially that of human beings, which is also something that a lot of other vampires do. So I can't attribute this trait necessarily to him and to him only, but it is still very self-indulgent and selfish in nature. So we can at least say that he is a very selfish person. But anyways, Claudia is useful to him, and I think because of that, he likes her to a certain degree. It also helps boost his ego. He has created something, and something that can act like him and be like him. But like I said, there is also a lack of genuine emotional connection, which Claudia gets with Louis. If there was a true emotional connection, Lestat would be fairly honest with Claudia about why her life is like this, or why she's here. And he would be kind and validating to her feelings. But instead, he doesn't. He's not like that, and he doesn't necessarily care about her hopes and dreams or ideas of finding love. To him, she is a child, a prop, and that is what she should be. That is why she's here. She's here to make sure that Louis stays. And that right there is one of his biggest downfalls, because of his inability to recognize people separate from himself, or to have any form of empathy for others, even those of his own kind. He also does a similar thing with Louis at the beginning of the film. Louis is a person who clearly contemplates the why of things. You can see that he has a more sensitive personality, and while he does whine a lot, and sometimes I do see his victim complex, at the same time he's very much interested in not killing humans, at least at the beginning, whereas other vampires don't. He still has empathy for them. He still sees them as people, no matter their evil deeds that they have done in life, which is why in the scene where him and Lestat go hunting for aristocrats, it's so hard for him to even drink the old aristocratic woman's blood. Not that she's necessarily a great person, but he still sees her as a human, and it's hard for him to just blatantly kill like that. I think that's why towards the end of the film, Armand calls his soul so beautiful, because Louis still has a form of empathy. And because of his empathy, he does ask many questions and contemplates and wonders about human life, and also vampire life, and what the meaning of it all is. And this offends Lestat. And so when Louis starts asking more questions, Lestat complains. Lestat complains because that emotional depth makes him uncomfortable. He has this sort of mentality as if, because Louis is a deeply empathic person and constantly wonders about the human state, I think this makes Lestat uncomfortable, because it would have to mean that he would have to reflect on what the meaning of his own life is. And like I will constantly repeat in this video, I don't think he has the emotional capacity for that. I also think that whatever happened to him in being formed as a vampire was also deeply tragic and traumatic, and it's too uncomfortable for him to work through. So as Louis keeps on asking him about his past, he doesn't want to revisit it. But instead of explaining that, he lashes out. It's one of his biggest problems. In reading a book called Adult Children and Their Emotionally Immature Parents, this is a characteristic that is very well known. People who are at least emotionally immature or on the spectrum of narcissism find it really hard to self-reflect, have empathy, or to reflect on their own past and trauma, because it's simply too painful for them. A lot of the times they're not willingly or at least emotionally equipped to handle that, and so if they try, it might send them down a spiral, which is something that they do not want to face or confront. I think Lestat fits this, and I don't know how the series is going. Hopefully there will be some growth for him, but as for now in this film, those are the characteristics that he exhibits. But going back to Claudia, the idea of using her as a prop is also promulgated by the usage of dolls within this movie. Every year, Lestat gives Claudia dolls on her birthday, and even though he doesn't tell her out loud that it is her birthday, which by the way is information that one person is naturally entitled to and should know. By omitting that kind of significant information that she's clearly entitled to also puts her under his control. Not having access to information about one's life, one's birth, one's birthday, and even general information about being a vampire ensures that Lestat constantly is a person which Louis and Claudia will have to come back to for more information. He also fear-mongers them a little bit about vampires outside of him, which, to be fair, the other vampires are not necessarily great. However, the way that Lestat establishes this without telling them the different types of gifts, abilities, and powers that vampires have not only makes them constantly at the mercy of Lestat's knowledge and therefore making him inexposable and therefore making him something that they cannot get rid of. This also makes them extremely vulnerable and completely uneducated for the world of vampires, so that when they go out, they may regret their choices and come back to Lestat. It's the same sort of dynamic that Mother Gothel has with Rapunzel, making sure that she is unaware of true information to keep her within a small place. That is something that Lestat also does, and makes himself look better than the other vampires that are out there in the world. Not to say that the other vampires are great, but at least Armand was able to let Louis know about the different gifts that exist. Meanwhile, living with Lestat, the only thing that Louis knew was the cloud gift. Not only that, but there's this general idea that one doesn't need to know what can hurt them. So both Louis and Lestat do not tell her for a long time how she came to be and the fact that she cannot grow older in her physical body. Louis does eventually tell her, but Lestat refuses to say anything, as he does not want to get rid or lose the illusion of their happy family. And also it'll bring up unwanted feelings and resentment from Claudia, which it does anyway. But I'm pretty sure that that is something that Lestat does not want to face. He would rather live pretending that everything is normal and everything is happy. He also does this with his relationship with Louis, even before Claudia comes along. He can see that Louis is clearly unhappy and doesn't understand his vampiric state, but instead takes Louis to different places, different parties, and ignores his question and his contemplations because he simply does not want to accommodate them, nor have space for them, nor have a deep discussion about them, since that is too much for him, and that shatters the image of his perfection. Another common trait that narcissistic people have is that they do not want to break this idea and delusion of their perfect life and how perfect they are as people. She also comments how he dresses her like a doll, because at the end of the day, like I said, she is a prop. She is a doll to complete their home, not necessarily a person of her own free will. I think the dolls not only symbolize keeping Claudia in her childlike state and in a childlike essence, the dolls are what Claudia is meant to look like and looks like initially to other people. But underneath is a woman who is desperate to come out and is trapped on the inside because she has no ability to come out from her small body. Just like how that corpse stays there, rotting underneath all the pretty and expensive dolls. I think the corpse also represents the woman that she wants to be, which she states herself that she wants to be her. And this moment of Claudia having her breaking point leads her to her own development of what I like to call her individual identity. So as the honeymoon phase starts to wear off and Claudia starts to realize that there is something wrong and Claudia is no longer a child, at least inwardly or in her mind, she obviously naturally wants to form her own identity. However, this immediately becomes a problem to Lestat. What I mean by forming her self-identity is as one grows up, we as children and then eventually teenagers and adults look to outside sources and also the sources that we have in our own homes to form a new identity that represents us and our soul. This is a natural process that can also include taking outside influence and adding little pieces that we agree with to shape our personalities and our identities as people, as our own individuals. In a normal family, this is supported by others in our families. In a narcissistic family, however, this poses a threat and a problem because forming one's identity that is outside of what is expected within the family system poses a threat to the narcissist. That self-differentiation and independence also becomes a problem to the narcissist. And so a lot of the times the narcissist can feel that one is abandoning them or leaving them in the dust, even though that is not the truth. If the narcissist is the parent, forming one's own identity that is separate from the parent becomes a problem and a threat and is actively stopped a lot of the times. I feel that this is what happened as Claudia steps away from being Lestat's protege and starts focusing on her own thoughts and feelings, her resentment, and feels negative emotion. Instead of her to have a safe space where she can feel that, Lestat and her start to butt heads very quickly. Lestat wants her to stop whining and complaining, calling her spoiled and ungrateful, which is not the truth. This girl was taken, killed, and then forced to come back to life into a place that she didn't really understand. She was molded by this person who couldn't really care less about her background or her feelings, and now she's recognizing that she has a perfect reason to lash out. But this complicates Lestat's life, and he doesn't want that. The biggest catalyst that brings about this change is Claudia seeing the woman in the window. As Claudia looks towards the woman in the window and sees her form, she says she wants to be her, which Louis completely understands, and you can see in his face that he knows it's about time someone explains this to Claudia. But on Lestat's face is a look of anger, and he calls it ridiculous that Claudia would want to be like a woman, because to him, it is completely ridiculous to want to be in any other form other than a prodigy of Lestat. This is a gift that he's given you. She is mortal. That's not the same. That's not what is equal to what Lestat has given this girl. With this form of thinking, I personally feel that deep down, he does know on the inside that this honeymoon phase is over and what is happening to Claudia is a very big deal, but I think he just refuses to accept it. Because if he accepts it, then he would have to acknowledge the mistake and accept the mistake that he has made. And that would mean he would have to self-reflect and look back into his insecurity, which is something that Lestat does not like to do. And that would hurt him deeply. So instead, he doesn't. And he tells Claudia that is a ridiculous thing to do, which can be argued as a form of emotional manipulation known as gaslighting. Gaslighting is a form of psychological abuse where a person causes someone to question their sanity, memories, or perception of reality. By telling Claudia that something that is perfectly normal for her to want to experience is abnormal, ridiculous, and something that shouldn't be discussed again, Lestat makes her question her reality. And so you can see how she has to go secretly behind his back to find that woman again and brings her corpse back home. In certain scenes, you see that he lifts her up, calling her a genius whenever they are hunting together or doing things together. He calls her nice things when, again, she is useful to him or when he's having fun. But outside of that, when Claudia starts to become her own person, he does belittle her in every opportunity that he can, which is another trait that is very commonly known with the narcissistic mother, having passive-aggressive compliments or passive-aggressive insults, which Lestat is mostly very fond of. As Claudia slowly starts to learn the truth and she becomes unhappy with both Louis and Lestat, she resents him for making her, which is completely reasonable in my personal opinion. But while in this scene he's playing the piano, he says, in quote, that her very presence irritates him, which feels completely irrational, and it's also a crazy thing to say to a child. But I always took it that it's not necessarily Claudia's face that it necessarily irritates him, but is rather that the fact that Claudia has now realized how unhappy she is and recognizes the truth, and because she resents him for it. And that irritates him, the fact that she resents him. And he is irritated by her presence because she now reminds him of the very mistake that he has also created and made. And because she is aware of this mistake, her appearance in the household on a daily basis would have to mean that he would have to confront that mistake and the fact that he made such a choice. He would have to confront the fact that Louis doesn't actually want to be with him, and that for him is too uncomfortable. So he lashes out, which is very on code for someone who is naturally selfish and can be considered narcissistic. A lot of narcissistic parents hate being reminded of their mistakes. One thing I wanted to discuss is the hypocrisy of Lestat. This is not necessarily narcissistic analysis, but rather to bring out how hypocritical Lestat can be, and that is with the dark gift. In the vampire world, being transformed into a vampire is known as the dark gift. And it seems that Lestat, when he was transferred, and this is a spoiler that I know from the people who've read the books, that when he was transformed, he didn't really have a choice, and that his transformation was tragic and could have also included some form of sexual assault, which in that case is truly horrific. When Lestat turns Louis, he makes it a big deal of giving Louis a choice. But in my personal opinion, he didn't really give Louis that much of a choice besides saying yes or no. At least he didn't give Louis an informed choice. Not to mention, he drained him out of blood completely after a certain point of watching him constantly, and was definitely the predator and Louis was the prey, which begs to question the hypocrisy of it all. He constantly states how this has been a gift when Louis is clearly miserable being a vampire. But I do find it interesting that Lestat, even in this situation, sort of always wants to be the person who bestows something upon somebody else, even though Louis is clearly uncomfortable and unhappy being a vampire, at least at the beginning, or the problems with being a vampire at the beginning, as if people should be grateful for this grand thing that he has given them. Same thing with Claudia. He expects her to be extremely grateful for this grand thing that he has given her. She is lucky and she is spoiled, which is something that he constantly says. But how can you consider somebody spoiled when you took their life into your own hands and didn't explain what would happen to them as they got older? If you really wanted to give someone an informed choice, you would tell them everything that could possibly happen, alternative scenarios, and have a full discussion with them. But this is too much work for Lestat, so he doesn't. And that's the hypocrisy behind Lestat. He sees him being a vampire as this grand thing and that everyone should be grateful for the gift that he's given him. But the reality is that he's lonely and he doesn't know how to accept that. He's constantly looking for companionship and he goes about it in the wrong way. And instead of him to own up and to be accountable for his mistakes, he refuses to be. But anyways, as Claudia decides to kill him and finally recognizes her identity and recognizes how she is so unhappy being around him and there should be more than Lestat out there in the world, she starts to regain her own power. But even so, there is a toxic family dynamic that tends to happen in which Louis is still very much attached to Lestat. Of course, they do have a vampire bond, but I find it interesting that despite having so much love for Claudia, after Claudia asks Madeline to be turned, Louis is ready to separate from her to a man that he just met for a few months or a few weeks in this film. Armand. He's only known him for a little amount of time, and yet he is ready to separate. If it wasn't for Armand being behind the killing of Claudia, I have a very deep feeling that he would have went with Armand off on his own. In the adaptation, this is different. Like I've said previously in my other videos, I always think that Louis, no matter the form of his adaptation, whether it's in book, film, or TV show, is always codependent and doesn't know how to be on his own. And I think Lestat also might have picked up on that. And as a result, their family dynamic became that of the narcissistic mother, the codependent enabler father, and the child who was the victim. You know, your guys' opinions about things. And I really just love Anne Rice's work as a whole. And I want to start getting into the books because I genuinely enjoyed watching these films and the show. And I'm so sad that I didn't know that the show existed this quite early on. But you guys, that's all for me for now. Thank you guys so much for watching this video, and I will see you guys in the next one. Okay, bye.
Oh my.